Hi, good morning.
Good morning, something. Okay.
Can you hear me? Yes, right?
Yes.
Okay. So what is situation? Oh, okay, we have attendees.
Yeah, some people were still joining. I think the number is getting higher. But yeah, it's 9:02. We can start. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Q&A session. Today we have two parts. The first part will be the technical session, and the second is the business-oriented session. And the way you can ask your questions is either by putting your question in the questions section. You see the questions button on the right-hand side, and I will read it out loud, and one of our speakers will answer it. Or you can either raise your hand, and I will give you the mic, and you can come on stage and ask your question, but just please be aware that it will be recorded, the session is recorded. Yeah, so you have these two options, and I think we can start. We have our,
You have to accept me again. It's kind of strange.
what happened? Do you know, Paco, why you,
Yeah, I click on this hands like, but I did it by mistake and then I left the stage because of
okay.
that. So you have to accept me again. And I see Rajiv and okay.
Okay.
So don't we have questions on the technical part?
Yes. Now I see Jason has come as speaker. Okay, great. Yeah, we have some frequently asked questions that have been asked to us during the week, and maybe we can start with them.
Mhm.
So one of the questions is there a reason why put is spared out in the marketplace product definition? NGSI API also offers put calls.
Can we see the question written somewhere?
Yeah.
Because
I will put it. Okay. It's now under the questions section.
I think you'll find that with NGSI LD, it tends to use patch rather than put. I can't think of any NGSI LD operation which uses put.
yeah,
So NGSI LD operation which uses put. There are NGSI V2 operations which use put, but there aren't any NGSI LD operations which use put. I think that's probably the reasoning behind it, isn't it, Juan?
Yeah, that's also I think what the reason is.
Okay, thank you. We've got another question, which says.
That's the same.
Oh, sorry.
No. Sorry, I thought it goes on top. Okay, so is there any data model regarding sustainable development goals?
Exactly.
Well, we would need Albert to give an answer to that question, but in general, I mean, sustainable development goals is a huge topic, and you can see, for instance, some of the sustainable development goals connected to cities, to give an example. And there might be data models that are relevant for an application. So what I can actually foresee, and I leave to Alberto to develop further in the response, but
Hello?
what I
Do you hear me?
yes, what I can definitely see is that, for instance, just to give an example, there were, and I mention this because I remember a use case connected to that. There was a use case connected to air quality monitoring in cities. And I don't remember which number, but this is somehow connected to one of the sustainable development goals. I don't remember if it was connected to health of people or quality of life of people and so on. So definitely there will be data models that out there in the Smart Data Models Initiative that are going to be useful for some use cases that are connected to sustainable development goals. But there might be, on the other hand, other experiments connected to sustainable development goals for which there might not be data models out there in the Smart Data Models Initiative that can be used. In which case, what we are suggesting is that the experiment contributes those models and that define them and contribute them to the Smart Data Models Initiative, so that we can offer that to future projects and in that way protect also the investment on definition of such data models within the experiments. And well, I don't know if Alberto wishes to add anything else.
Yeah, I was in the wrong place at the beginning. Yeah, there are several data models related with this. It is true that we don't have mapped the 157 goals of the Sustainable Development Goals, not only the 17 dimensions, but it is something that has been discussed in several projects, and we are expecting to get these data models completed. And as you mentioned, Juanjo, there are several data models. I guess that there are 9 related specifically with the conditions like the air quality, water quality, noise level, radiation level, and there is plenty of things you can find out into the environment subject where these data models are grouped. So I'll put the link to this subject now in a moment into the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. There is one more question asking the speakers to please say more about the practical exercises. But there is no specific unclarity.
So, well, perhaps at least Jason, Alberto, Rajiv, each of you have proposed exercises, I understand. So if you want to elaborate a bit more on that, or whoever has made that question, yeah, feel free also to raise their hand and join the conversation.
Yeah, maybe I'll go. So yeah, yesterday in the yesterday's session, we explained to you the reference example. Well, that's one of the examples that we came up with for as you know as the reference example of hypertrophy. But there are more use cases that can be solved, of course, using the same components and be developed with that. what we expect you to come up is either you have an existing challenge or you know of the challenge that SMEs face within your network that you want to solve, specifically in terms of data exchange. And data exchange can be anything like transactional data or big data or analytics data or like weather data, for example. There could be any kind of data that you want to exchange, but the key factor would be that it remains decentral and you don't need to necessarily put the data in on a particular platform to be able to share, for example. Then IFA Trust, of course, can help you with decentralized data sharing, and that is what we expect you to come up with in a practical exercise. Preferably come up with your own challenge. If you cannot find a use case, then of course there are some use cases provided by Jason in one of the practical exercises presentation. You can refer to those, for example, or and then come up with your own practical exercise in that. Dennis, you want to add something? Jason?
Yeah. The problem I have is that I have no idea about the skill set of the various attendees as to what level various people are at. Therefore, the slide deck, which is labeled practical exercises, has got what is effectively a very broad range of, you need to know this, you need to know this, you need to do this, blah, 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 blah. If you already are, say, for example, a fireware expert, then actually, going through reviewing all the videos we've done over the last 3 years is probably not necessary, because you're probably already cognizant with that and more than that. However, there may be people who are who want to do a review of what NGSI is about, and so on and so forth. Now, on the practical terms, it really goes as to what Rajiv was pointing out, is that, okay, you've got, in order to do I4 Trust, you've got a problem. You've got a problem which will involve data exchange. You've got a problem that involves data exchange where you need to have a neutral data exchange layer, in other words, NGSI LD, in order to move your data from one place to another. The slide deck says, okay, well, how about taking the idea of having, say, a farm and a vet? And the first thing you're going to have is that, imagine that this farming cooperative comes through your door and says, we want to connect our systems together. Well, they are probably not technically competent in these systems. It's you who's the expert. You're the one who's going to be advising the people to do this. So there's a very brief explanation of saying, okay, well, actually within veterinary practices, there is this following data model. Okay, well, then you need to investigate what's this what's the data model? How would I go about creating a data model out of this? Your data model might not be perfect, but then someone like, say, Alberto could say, yeah, well, we wouldn't probably put that as a relationship because we want to keep it flat or whatever. But it's an exercise of actually getting some data into a system. Then you've got the issue of, do you put your data in or how much of the vet's data do you steal into the farming system? Do you want to get hold of it all the time? Is it static data? Do you want to upload it once? What sort of rights have you got to get hold of it? Then you can move on to things like, okay, I have, let's say, a concept for moving stuff around. What models do I need in my system? Well, the one which and I can ping a link of the I think it's on the next advanced NGSI LD session. I'm going to ping a link of my connected solution for how these things work. But how would you set up a system where you've got say cows in a field? Now, I want you to think about what is the architecture you might use, and then challenge it, and then challenge yourself, and then work out, why would I do it this way? Why would it do it the other way? Because the concept here is that a customer is coming in and asking you these nasty questions, and you need to have plausible reasons why you might do X, plausible reasons why you might do Y, because they will be the expert in, say, veterinary science, and tell you no, the legal ID is bound to be unique because of government regulations. Do you want to use that as the ID? Do you want to use it as an attribute? And then you can discuss that further as to whether this is a worthwhile thing to do or not. My eventual aim, after I4 Trust is finished, is to write this up as a fireware tutorial, which is why it's a work in progress. But you can see that there's various actions you can do there. Now, moving on, one of the broadest exercises is review the questions which are aimed for the fireware experts examination, and answer them, because there are fireware experts out there. They've been through this process. I said you can chat to them in the elsewhere, find out how much fun it is to take the examination. But the questions themselves are open, and the idea is to be able to explore how much you know. So if you go in there and answer, I don't know, what is the difference between authentication and authorization, for example, then the assumption is that you've got a basic level of security analysis, which would be of use for the I4 Trust. Again, it's a matter of knowing what your level is, knowing where your gaps are, and of course, if anyone wants to look at the questions right now and say, I haven't a clue what that's on about, I'm happy to answer the questions right now. I could even put in the chat where the list of questions were. Hold on a second. Experts. So this is all about getting a background. There we go, documentation. Understanding that you've got sufficient tools to be able to use I4 Trust at an expert level. This is not going to be spoon-fed. This is not going to give you do this. Oh yes, you've got it right. It's more along the lines of investigate this, investigate that. There you go. I'll just put that back in here. Now, you could look at the architectural. Did I put this? Ask a question, or did I put in the chat? Just a minute. Where do I place this? Oh, I'll put it in there. And then send. That's it. Is that right? Send it. Yes, I'll put it in there. Okay. Click twice. If you are unfamiliar with fireware, then you might want to look at the architecture questions, for example, and say, well, how would I do that? It should be the case that you can answer all of these at a good level. So I'll open it up to the next question.
Okay, thank you, Jason. We have a question coming in which says, in the configuration of a context broker federation based on NGSI-LD registration mechanism, how do iShare components operate, interact with the context broker and the context provider?
The concept of registration in a federated environment is a pool of a pool of brokers who are already sharing your data. So I would not usually have a authentication mechanism between within the pool. It's more of a case that you would have the authentication between these. So registration is probably not terribly useful when you are talking about separated data. It's more the case that you would use that to augment the existing data. The way I would generally deal with getting data from third parties is I would use an upsert and get it into my system, because I can then control which bits of data are in there and what's there. So registration is probably the wrong way to go, in my opinion.
Okay. I hope that answers the question. Jason, the link that you had put, I also put it in the chat, so you can remove it from the questions section. Yeah. Next question is, what's the examination format regarding I4Trust expert certification for the ones that are already fireware experts?
I think that's probably Oracle, isn't it?
Juanjo is muted. No.
Well, fireware experts will have just an examination to double check that they have somehow assimilated those concepts that go a little bit beyond the more classical, let's say, fireware, specifically aspects linked to the identity and access management. But apart from that, there will not be something that's going beyond. So you have to kind of prepare those exercises that are connected to the use cases involving offering in the marketplace and definition of terms and conditions and configuration of an environment and design of an architecture that somehow leverage on the components that are specifically used in I4Trust. But that's mostly it. Yeah.
The expert examination is a large list of questions. Your selection picked at random, certain from each section. Now, it is possible to have an expert's examination where you don't touch security, for example, because no one's asking questions about security. They're asking questions about, I don't know, machine learning or something like that. However, there is a security section, and it will just be a review of that security section rather than necessarily saying, you know, what is NGSI v2, what is it, NGSI LD, blah, blah, blah. Fireware experts are already experts in fireware, so that's pointless reviewing what they've done already. For those of you who are looking to become fireware experts, as I said, there are a lot of materials out there, and the sort of questions we've got are in that list. So if anyone's got any confusion about any of those questions, ask one of those questions right now, and I will answer them to an expert level.
There is a dedicated page on the website of the fireware.org, which elaborates about examinations of fireware experts, which may give you some hints of the kind of questions you may get in connection to fireware components, if that helps. Can you place that link in the chat, perhaps, Jason?
Yeah, I put the link in the questions earlier. I don't know if it just disappears. It would be in the answer. It'll be in the answered list. I mean,
okay, I didn't see that.
As an example, I'm going to give you two questions on NGSI interfaces, right? And I'll just put them with the questions. Oops, that's the wrong link. Those are the first two questions in the fireware examination. So, where would you find temporal data with an NGSI request response, and how should geographic data be held with an NGSI request? Well, it should become clear if you've done some background reading, or indeed what I'm going to cover on Tuesday, that where we're talking about temporal data, and we're talking about, for example, the temporal interface of NGSI LD, the default element, which holds the timestamp, is called observed at. That is defined within the core context of NGSI LD. And this is always defined as a property of a property in NGSI LD, or it is in the metadata. And the key word which would be the examiners would be looking for is it's in the metadata, because you do not need to hold a timestamp at an entity level. You need to hold it in information about the attribute. In other words, metadata. The other standard metadata element is the unit code, which is the UNCFAX list of elements. Again, if you look at the sample which I'm going to provide, you get it's fairly obvious what meters are, but is there a UNCFAX code for beats per minute for heart rate? Yes, there is, and then you can get the full list. You can get furlongs per fortnight. It's got every single unit of measurement you might want to do, because the number 7 isn't particularly useful on this. 7 watts. Now, if you're looking at how should geographic data be held with an NGSI request, again, this is well defined within both NGSI v2 and NGSI LD. If you want to use geofencing for any request, you will need to use a location attribute. If it isn't called location, it won't by default be usable for geofencing. There is a parameter in NGSI LD to use another name if necessary, so like say observation space, but the default one is location. And it should be known that I would structure my data model such that my thing has a location, and it will be called location, because that is the standard name for these things. So you can see I've been talking for a minute and a half, and you can tell that I know how I should structure an NGSI request. And it's at that sort of level that you would get your questions into, do I understand NGSI? And I can if people have got no better questions, I can just keep on typing them in and answering them for you, so you can understand what sort of level we're at, if that will be helpful.
I guess there is a question on the question and answers.
I think that's still the one that Jason.
Oh, no, yes, yeah, exactly.
Well, unless there's some other more questions coming in, I will continue with an architecture scenario.
Yeah.
Again, this is from the list of questions. So, if it needs to be done in 2 parts. We've got the app. Right, where did we do them? Oops, can't put it. One. Yeah. Okay, so oh, I think Control C. Right, so here we go. I run a cycling company. Read out the entire scenario. I run a cycling company where I attach GPS devices to my bicycles, which I rent out to tourists. I also offer a companion app on a mobile phone. My smart application should track the location of the bicycles and send a warning to the app if they go too far off track. I also calculate statistics to be displayed, such as route taken, calories burnt, distance traveled, and so on. My smart solution will also receive weather information from a meteorological web service. When it is going to rain, I want to send a message to a companion app to direct the tourist to a local bar or attraction or shelter. I have negotiated a series of special offers with local businesses, which are only available at certain times. I would also eventually like to sell back my data, my crowd data, back to local tourist authority. So this is a smart tourism scenario, which involves several actors, and you would actually be able to say, okay, well, if I want to get information from the weather service, I would need to either use a registration or a subscription. And I would probably, in this case, because we potentially having to pay for this data, I would probably say I would use a subscription here to say, or a cron job to regularly poll for the data and say, okay, please, I would like to get hold of the weather forecast for the next hour. I will pay you, and I'm allowed to have the following bits of data from you. Similarly, I can then have my authorized bit of data from their system into my system. How you could do that as follows. Now, the first part of the system saying I've got GPS devices, bicycles, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, in this particular case, I would need a device model. Fair enough. I'm talking about an IoT agent. I want to be able to upsert readings into my system so that I've got some idea where my bicycles are. I can then say, okay, well, the bicycles themselves aren't going to have all, the device themselves aren't going to have all of my data. So I probably want to link the actual data to an actual tourist. So effectively, I would have a person model, which would have a location attribute, which would have a provided by relationship of a property, metadata, to say this was provided by that GPS system, because I would want to query where are my people and what is the weather on them, which I could spread the when I receive the weather forecast, I could say, okay, my tourist, I could put in likely weather for that tourist as an attribute, because I've now got this the weather information which I've I've processed there, so I could keep it all on one model. Moving on to things like the statistics. Statistics are obviously things like calories burnt, distance traveled, blah blah blah. You could use the temporal interface of the NGSI to make questions of historic question value, or you could persist the data into, say, a SQL database or a Postgres database using a component from the fireware catalog like Cygnus or Draco. So I would then, or if you want to have, Quantum Leap would also be able to get the information into a database. Once you've moved out of the NGSI world into databases or just plain JSON LD or whatever, you're doing something a little bit different. And then you can ask questions which are not necessarily about the now. So that way I could work out, calculate calories burnt or distance travel. I can then say, okay, well, I want to be able to push stuff onto an application. Well, that's usually going to be a complex event processing. There is a complex event processing module in the fireware catalog, which will be able to send things there. The final bit is, I don't think we put the text, but I'd eventually like to be able to. Oh yeah, sorry. I want to send a message to the companion app to direct tourists to a local bar or attraction or to shelter. In case you're wondering, this is all based on a wonderful cycling holiday I did in the north of Ireland, which has got wonderful bars and terrible weather at times, and very nice bars. Obviously, you can consider that the attractions again would be a another data model. Potentially, that data may again come from a third party. We'd have to have things like elements like, when is this attraction open? When's the bar shut? Because there's no point in sending someone in the pouring rain to a bar that's shut. And so you can work out your data model. But the final point is, eventually I would like to sell back the data, obviously movement of where the tourists actually are in a place is of use to the local authority, because obviously it helps knowing where potential money generators are going to be. And you could work out how would I go about offering that data to the local authority and charging for it, and so on and so forth. Well, that's very much I4 Trust. So you can see that if you're looking at the scenarios here, you can start thinking, well, what actors would be involved? Where would my barriers actually be? And how would I go about moving data around? There are effectively two mechanisms for pushing data around a well-designed fireware system. One of them is to use registrations, and the other one is to combine a subscription with an upsert. Now, I suspect that because of the barrier that there is there to make sure that only certain amounts of data come through, I suspect the latter is probably more likely to be used, so that all of your systems are pushing data into my system so I can use it, rather than I am constantly requesting data from your system.
One question I would like to add, associated, for instance, to the example that Jason was using, is that we should not assume that all the systems that are trying to get connected and sharing data have to be implemented using fireware. So, for instance, in this particular use case, the weather, the meteorological web might not be based on fireware. Even the system that manages the bicycles might not be based on fireware. But what is relevant regarding IFO-Trust is that all these participants have agreed to share data using the context broker. So that means that if I'm the developer of the application for the renting of bicycles, I would export some interfaces based on NGS-ILD with a number of data models describing what is a bicycle, what are the bike parking slots, routes, different things. And that is the way I would be, for instance, exposing data so that the tourism office may use it. And perhaps I monetize part of that data and they have to pay for it. And the same way, me as an application, I will be willing to consume data from the meteorological web. And there is where I will assume that it will export such data using an NGS-ILD interface. But again, I want to stress the participants may have systems that are not based on fireware. They are agreeing on using the context broker and NGS-ILD as the mean for finding or adopting, let's say, a common lingua to exchange. That's a bit the basis with IFO-Trust. Of course, some of the systems might be based on fireware. That will be making more straightforward for that particular participant to exchange and consume data, but it's not, let's say, a requisite.
So in this particular case, you've got to think about potentially all of these actors are completely different to one another, and think about where the interfaces are. Now, when this originally set up for the question was originally set up for the experts examination, this was based on NGSI v2. The assumption was that there was going to be this was going to be a powered by fireware solution. But as Juanco pointed out, it might be the case that, okay, I'm just using, I don't know, Aardvark for my system, and I just want to be able to publish a certain amount of data, and it could be the tourist authority, which is actually in the driving seat here, saying, okay, we'd like to suck data from the bike tour manufacturer, or we'd like to suck data in from the meteorological system, because we, as the Tourist Board of Northern Ireland, want to get more people into our bars, and our bars are very nice.
Okay, thank you, Jason. I think maybe we can wait a few seconds if there's a question coming in. Otherwise, maybe we have a question for the audience. And we know that some of you have already started doing the practical exercises. Yeah, and we would like to ask you how they are doing, and if you would like to ask something, or if you would like to share what you are working on. Feel free to share, please.
Sharifa, just brief mention to thank the participants in the webinar for the Tuesday, which has been already started to work into the incubator repository. I got some pull requests and some issues, and I encourage the rest of the participants to keep on working on developing just examples of these data models. We have several options into the exercise that we did, and I've seen that some of them are already working, and I want to encourage the rest of them just to test and to make questions if they are willing to progress on the design of the smart data models.
Thank you, Alberto. Anything you would like to share? No difficulties faced on the exercises? Now would be the time to ask.
I'm saying if you want to start up just playing around with stuff, obviously the fireware tutorials, both for NGSI V2 and NGSI LD, are available. They are not a proper architecture. It's assumed that you actually got some better idea how to use an architecture, but it's a nice introduction as to how the various elements of fireware connect together. A very simple scenario. Indeed, I was showing some of it in the NGSI LD session earlier this week, saying how these things connect together. What does a payload look like? The payload structure, once you get the hang of it, is very obvious, but it's worthwhile just playing around with those, playing around with the application, looking at the code to see how it all connects together. It's REST. It's not difficult, but it's just a matter of familiarizing yourself with the background of what the structure is, where does stuff need to go, and how it connects to the rest of the ecosystem.
Okay, now we have this question. It says, in the certification questions, there is no mention of data models. Are smart data models mandatory in order to use NGSI LD, or are they just another option to describe data like schema, like schema.org or Etsy?
I'll let Alberto go first because I'll probably have a rebuttal to what he says.
Yeah, I guess this kind of a false alternative, because most of our data models are taking elements from schema.org, and therefore, as much as you are doing the smart data models, you are working with schema.org. It is also true that there are some elements of schema.org which are not covered, and therefore smart data models goes beyond that. So of course, you can take wherever you want from schema.org, and in fact, what the exercise, what we were suggesting, is to take some of the already existing elements in schema.org and to adapt the format to the Smart Data Models Initiative, and not only to Smart Data Models Initiative. In order to use it with NGSI LD, you have to adapt. And the exercise that was planned and the exercise was exactly this. So therefore, there is no such an alternative. You can use schema.org, and as long as you get a data model, you can contribute to the Smart Data Models initiative, because basically most of the things which are in schema.org will be ending being part of Smart Data Models. It is also true that the schema.org sometimes offer an enormous bunch of possibilities. And in some cases, what we do is just not to take every single possibility that the schema.org is allowing, for the sake of interoperability. So let me explain this. If a schema.org is offering you 3 very different types for the same attribute, then if we have these 3 options, it will be difficult if you are sending the data that your receiver will know what of these 3 formats are you sending. And therefore, whenever possible, we just choose one, the most, let's say, the most powerful or the most adaptable of these options is the one that we are taking, and only one, but for sake of interoperability. So summarizing the answer. So the answer to can we use schema.org or can we use Smart Data Models is not an alternative. We are both doing quite the same things.
To take the developer's viewpoint, I don't care whether you got that attribute name from Ngsi, or you got that attribute URI from schema.org, or you found it from some other ontology. What I want is an attribute which has got a well-defined name. If you place additional information in the @graph, you could say, well, actually, this one is the same as that one. So you are giving sufficient information to third parties to say, well, you know, I don't like smart data models, I want to use schema.org. There's the equivalent, saying what I'm actually calling it could be replaced with something else. But the basic viewpoint of the smart data models is that you have a very flat hierarchy. You have an entity. An entity typically has a series of attributes, and they directly have a value on the real world. Okay, it could be a relationship, but it directly has a value. So you have, you know, this room has a temperature. What the smart data models tend not to do is to have a hierarchy where, I don't know, we have a room which has a device, which has a reading, which has a value, which has a temperature. Now, the reason why that isn't done is, although that's ontologically correct, is that it makes it difficult to actually access the data. Because when I'm pushing up the system, I just want to say the temperature is now 6. I don't want to have to, every single time when I upsert, navigate through 3 or 4 indirections to work out, well, actually, it's this value here which has updated. Now, provided I have called that attribute by a recognizable name, the URI should then be usable by a third-party system, which is when I'd like to pass this on to Sharifa. If I have a system which has got usable data, is that, or what are the minimum requirements for, say, a machine learning system to be able to recognize disparate data sets as being usable data?
Sorry, Jason, can you say the question again?
Imagine I'm giving you a load of NGSI LD data from multiple different sources. What would you, as a third party, let's say you're doing some analysis of the system, how would you try, or what minimum information would you need to be able to unify that data?
I mean, it depends on what we are trying to predict or get at. yeah, if we have, so for example, with with the example of cattle chain data, if we want to predict lameness in animals, and we're not just trying to, or we're trying to predict a trend, but also a seasonality, then we would have to have over 2 years worth of data to predict the seasonality, because otherwise it would be insufficient. So yeah, it depends on your goal and all the attributes you need to have in order to predict the value that is missing.
But presumably, if I don't know, field A has got one data model with certain attributes, and sample B has got different names for the attributes, it starts becoming tricky. Presumably, there's going to be some overlap between the names I've got, but it would be a lot easier if you've got a unified data set. So you can say that every single address is a schema.org address, or every single location is a Etsy URI location. Is that a minimum requirement before you get started, or is this something which you could where you've got partial data sets on which are potentially got different values in? Is that usable or not usable?
I need rehab for this question. I honestly haven't dealt with this part yet, but yeah, I think it's something we can ask Rehab on and get back to this question. I think she's dealing with this part right now.
Because of course, if you've got a linked data, JSON LD data, not specifically NGSI, but JSON LD data, it is possible to annotate my at context in such a fashion that I can say, well, what I called a schema.org address is actually a smart data models address or whatever. And it would mean that you could, if necessary, do a expansion compaction operation on those attributes to align them within your data set before you actually start working on it. Now, as I said, as a developer, what I want is as follows. I want to work with short names. I want to work with short names which make sense to me within my personal system. My boss would probably say, well, I want you to make sure that your short name aligns to a well-known URI, ideally the URI which is used in our industry. So whichever data model is the preferred URI in that industry. However, I'm realistic. I would realize that there are competing ontologies out there, and take for example name. Schema.org has got name. Etsy has got name. Friend of a friend has got name. But they're all meaning the same thing. They're just different URIs. The idea would be that I would use whatever is mainly used in my industry. But if I'm being really kind, I could actually add in the fact that this ontology is equivalent to that. Or if I'm being a little bit more mean, that could be pushed onto the third party to analyze the fact that these things are the same. If you looked at the example vets data website, which I put in the practical exercises, you can see that they actually have a dictionary of ontologies which match to one another within the veterinary field, because again they can't decide what the best name for X, Y, or Z is, which is why the smart data models are just collating what is common practice rather than saying you should use this. It's a matter of publicizing the front runner where possible, so that the data is more likely to be usable. But if it isn't going to be usable directly, either you need to annotate with your @graph, or you need to get someone to analyze the data post hoc, so that they can say, yes, this name is actually a name, is actually a name, is actually a name, which actually goes back to another point, which is if you look at the core context will default to an Etsy default context / something or other. That's not really very usable by third parties, because what that means is that I have failed to map my attribute to another proper URI. So it's more likely that will not be recognized with a third-party data set as being the real popular URI for that particular attribute. So when you create your data models, go through your attributes, add them to the list. Go through your sub-attributes, add them. Your properties, add them to the list. Where you have an object like an address, the sub-attributes will, of course, be defined by the name of the attribute itself. So address, you're going to get address locality, you're going to get address this, what have you, anyway. But you can put those into your mapping as well if you wish. Now, what am I talking about? Other way around. If you have an object like address and it has sub attributes, it is good practice to put the sub attributes also in your @context.
I hope this has answered the question. Do we have any more? As I said in the audience, if you have started with the practical exercises and have any questions on those, or would like to share any thoughts, please feel free, don't be shy. Okay, somebody's asking. Okay, Annette is saying, I have an example from our use case. Great. I understand that in smart data models, your model should be pretty flat, but what if we do need of a device address, GPS location, device type, current internal time, I guess, to determine whether person can open the device or not? These temperatures. Okay, so I will read it again. I understand that in smart data models, your model should be pretty flat, but what if we do need a device address, a GPS location, device type, current internal temperature to determine whether a person can open the device or not?
I don't know if the rest can understand the question, but I do not understand the question very well. Perhaps the person that has formulated that can take the floor and elaborate a bit further. We do not need to just interact through the chat. I mean, feel free to raise your voice.
The starting point I would use for this system is there already is a smart data model device model, which I've again put in the questions. And many of those attributes you've already dealt with are already on there. So, for example, we have a device. It has an address. That would be a schema.org address, presumably, unless you're talking MAC address. Again, the MAC address is in the device data model. That's a second attribute. Location is a standard attribute. Device category, I think it is what you mean by device type, presumably like temperature sensor or motion sensor or gauge or what have you. Current internal T. Now, this is where it starts getting fun. Smart data models are a basis of the names you'd want to put onto a device. However, they are extensible. So you could very easily have additional attributes. The use case I keep using with the smart Fireware Smart Farm is animal collars. Now, my device has got a heart rate monitor. My device has got a location, and the location is already well defined within device because it's one of the common things. It's common to virtually every entity you've got in Fireware. But heart rate is not, obviously. So I just add this as an additional attribute into the model. So the model would have that as a separate attribute. So all of these could, from where we're currently at, could all be placed onto a single device model. As far as I'm concerned, but yeah, I think the thing to do is to stick your hand up and join us on stage, and we can actually talk. This is a nice question.
One question, and this is just a speculation because again, for me, the question is not that clear. But something that is worth mentioning is that regarding many data models, you may find a lot of attributes in the description. And you may think, okay, I want to use this type, but actually not. I don't need for my use case all the attributes. But if you take a look at the definition of many of these data models, most of the attributes are optional, and that means that for your particular use case, you may come and start with and rely on a definition of a device type in this case, but only with those attributes that are relevant for your application. That doesn't break any rule. That's totally feasible. I don't know if that was the question, but I just wanted to take advantage and clarify that point because perhaps it wasn't.
Okay.
Yes, you would need a lot of attributes. Yes, you would need a lot of attributes on that single entity to deal with that. But that is because the context of your entity is complex, and obviously, the more state information you've got, the more tricky the questions you can ask. The obvious thing to use within NGSI to try and get, I don't know, the device of type X, which has got a temperature greater than Y, is to use the Q parameter within actually, in this case, combination of Q parameter and ID parameter, because Q parameter is used to filtering an entity. It can be used either directly on the entity's endpoint, or it can be used as part of a subscription to narrow down a subscription, so that only fire if we're running out of beer or whatever. Only fire if we're running out of beer in aisle 6, or only if we're running out of beer in aisle 6 and the store is still open, are going to be the sort of things you could do quite nicely with the Q parameter. You start moving on to, say, security questions. You can start using something like XACML rules to add in things like timing onto your question. So, only switch on this light after 5 p.m. But yeah, you need to get a lot of attributes. Of course, if you really need to get a lot of attributes, what you could do is just send the whole entity to a microservice or a proxy to say, okay, I need to get hold of this information, and then adjudicate. To determine whether a person can open a device or not does sound to me very much like a security question. So the way you would keep this generic is you would have a proxy which would read the incoming request, which has got a header authenticating who I am. You would then need to make a second request to get hold of the device with the various attributes. You would then push to a PDP the information with the various attributes you've got, and your PDP rules would give you a permit or deny response, which would then either allow or not allow the request to continue through to whatever you're doing with the open device. Presumably, it's a patch onto the device itself. But if that's too complex to set up using XHTML, what you could do, of course, is you could just have a proxy which did this directly, rather than just check the values directly, rather than go off to an XHTML server. But you're going to have to somehow interrupt the flow of patch, go off and open the door in order to do this. The existing security tutorials, which are under the NGSI v2 banner, the concepts also work totally well under NGSI LD. It's because security elements are orthogonal to context. Fireware doesn't care how you secure your data. It just would really rather like the fact that you actually do have some sort of security layer. So it's you can look at those tutorials to work out how to. I think the case I have there is ring the bell after 6 o'clock, but you could extend it by adding in more attributes. If you're pushing stuff to XHTML, you need XHTML is just an adjudicator. So you need to supply all of the various pieces of information which they will require to make that request. So you need to supply your current temperature or your device type, and it's just going to say yes or no.
Yeah. So I to add on to that, Jason, I think that's where in i4Trust we have this authorization provider concept from iShare. Where you can define the policy and exactly these attributes on the conditions under which the person can access or open that device, for example. So what I understand from reading this question, it seems that there is device that are spread across, and the person goes to that device, and based on certain conditions, if it meets, then that person is allowed. First thing is to check if that person is allowed to open that box for whatever reason. So those conditions could definitely be added in the authorizations provider or authorization registry as a policy. And when those conditions are met and the person is actually close to that device, so that is another condition, then it should be it should allow to open the device. If the person's location is somewhere else and the device location is somewhere else, perhaps then it should not allow. So those kind of checks, I believe, is what the person is asking, right? Which of course, in my view, is possible.
And of course, what you could end up with here is you could end up with various different layers of security. So it could be that I4 Trust is checking, are you allowed to access this data? But there could be something else more internal saying, maybe within my system, I'm saying it's after 5 o'clock, so I'm not going to let you in. Which I might not need to push the I4 Trust layer. So it could be the case that I4 Trust does its authentication, says, yes, you're allowed to access this data, and forwards the request, but the request could still be denied by some sort of internal proxy.
Yeah, that's perfectly possible.
And this, of course, adds in more complexity to your architecture, because we're talking about a data sharing architecture here. You need to work out which role can do what, and which layer of allowing stuff is responsible for what.
Okay, thank you all. And that says that this elaboration has has helped her indeed. We only have a few minutes left in the technical session. Is there anything more you would like to ask us? Okay. We have a question that says, probably out of the scope of my use case, but for those IoT devices built on a PC, which is PC on board, with very limited capabilities, RAM and CPU, which would be the recommended mechanism to get access to the provided service, meaning the one the use case is of. Should I read it again?
Probably yes.
Oh, offering. Okay, so for those IoT devices built on a PC on board with very limited capabilities, meaning RAM and CPU, which would be the recommended mechanism to get access to the provided service, meaning the one the use case is offering.
There are available resources for getting connecting, say, a Raspberry Pi to a fireware system. I've seen a little demo of a device which, if the device can send an attribute, let's say a JSON request, that's sufficient. Because the device itself would connect to an IoT agent. An IoT agent would then interpret the request, whether it's JSON or plain text or just a series of bytes, and would be the responsibility of the IoT agent to understand that request in whichever dialect, language, blah, 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 you're dealing with, pick out the various bits of context data from it, and then push it to the context broker. There is a library, IoT agent node lib library, which is part of the fireware catalog, which is usable to provision such devices in a reusable fashion, so that you can map, say, the device which identifies itself as X will be URN X URN NGSI LD device 1234 instead. If that is not a supported dialect, you have to write your own custom agent. there is I did a video on custom IT agents about a month ago. If you don't require actuation of the device, in other words, it's just reading stuff, then it becomes much simpler, because effectively all you need to do is to interpret and then do an upsert. You could very easily write your own third-party component. I don't know, you've got a little database which says device X is your end this, device Y is your end that, and just read the device, analyze it, do an upsert. This is so that NGSI is not speaking any particular IT platform. It's just speaking NGSI. It's the south port of the IT agent, which talks, I don't know, JSON, or talks ultralight, or talks Sigfox, or whatever your preferred communication method is.
In any case, and to make it clear, in the kind of a scenario you would support in I4 Trust, what you would have is systems that are exporting through a context broker and NGSI LD interface. If what you want to do is that data coming from these devices you describe are made become, let's say, available for third parties in the data space to be able to use the measurements those devices offer, what you have to do is you have to create a participant which has a context broker, and then through an IoT agent, as Jason has explained, connects to the devices. And those IoT agents will be running typically close to the context broker and in the same backend, and connecting to the device in whatever IoT protocol that device supports. And therefore, these limitations about memory and so on and so forth is something that is up to the device. We assume the device will be running certain software supporting the IoT protocol the device exports, and that is software that is capable to run in such limited boards. But since the data they publish gets through the IoT agent, end up being stored and be visible through the context broker, that doesn't affect your use case. And that is if what you want is that your devices expose data into the data space. If you also want to be able allow third parties to actuate on those devices, it's a matter of configuring the IoT agents that would exist in the system that interface to the devices, so that those agents implement actuations, typically by forwarding mechanisms, so that if another party changes the value of certain attribute in the model that is being exposed, that change on the attribute translates by the agent, gets translated into a specific command on your device using the specific IoT protocol it supports. We will, I think Jason will explain more about how you can connect IoT devices to a context broker in the session that is planned for, let me check what day was that, for May 11. So you will learn more about that during that session. But it's not expected that you will place the software of a context broker in the board where your devices are running. It is expected that if you want to expose data coming from those devices into the data spaces, you will have a context broker and an agent that is interfacing with your devices. Yeah, as someone has written, yes, the agent, that's the trick.
Maybe.
And you will see in the session on May 11 that there are agents, for instance, interfacing with MQTT, so you would not, you probably will be able to reuse existing software from existing agents that are available in the catalog that will easy very much that task for you.
Okay, thank you, Juanjo. We need to close soon. Just somebody asked, maybe we take this as a last question, yes or no, whether upsert means inserting data from a subscription into a third-party system database.
Not necessarily the way I would describe it. When I use upsert, I'm usually talking about the upsert endpoint of the context broker. However, yes, the way you do data persistence is when a fireware component like Cygnus or Draco or Quantum Leap receives a subscription and it inserts data into a database, and that will be a database upsert. So yes, you're right, but usually when I'm talking about upsert from, say, an IoT agent, it's into the context broker. It's the same concept in that it will add if it's not there, and it will update if it is there.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, with that, we should be at the end of this Q&A session. We probably need to take a break. So I would say part 2 with the business questions. We'll start at 10:40, or do you want 10:35? Jeef, what do you think?
I think 10 minutes is good. So
okay. Okay, great. Then 10:40, the business Q&A part will start. Thank you.
See you after.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second part of these open Q&A questions, where we will be focusing on the business questions that you might have about iForTrust. We're going to have the same dynamic than in the technical part. I'll explain it in case we have different people joining us. The idea is that you can put your questions in the chat. There's a specific area for questions. If you want to comment about something else, you can put it on the chat. And we also have the option, we would like to have the session a bit more interactive, where you can raise your hand. And if you raise your hand, we will give you the mic so you can join us on stage. And then you can ask your question verbally. Do be aware that we are recording these sessions and we will post them publicly. So if you choose to do that, you will be in the recording. So yeah, I think that's everything. I also have most of the speakers here on stage, so that's really good. I'm missing somebody that I'm inviting now to stage, so that's great. I see that we don't have any questions yet, so I think it might be nice to go back to one of the questions that we received earlier in the week, which was basically if we could give an example based on a real use case where company X has data and is partner of DIH. What are the steps of the data integration of where it is stored and what additional steps are needed for onboarding and so on? I'll also put it in the questions. Perhaps Rajiv, you want to take this question?
Yes, thank you. I thought somebody raised the hand. Yeah, okay. Can you give an example based on real use case? Company X has data and is partner of DH. What are the step-by-step data integration where it is stored? What additional steps to onboard and so on? Gerard?
I can answer as well. You can start.
Yeah, so a real use case is the one use case that I can think of because there are a lot of domains and a lot of different use cases that we can think of. But just I was giving this as an example, maybe that I'll try to position again. Considering as a analytics company who analyzes soil quality, which can be useful for farmers or even for buyers of the property. What is the quality of the soil that the piece of land they are buying, or for whatever purpose it may be. That analytics company could actually post that data to be shared once they have the analysis of a location of the soil. And they could place it on marketplace, for example. That is similar to the example that we showcased yesterday, that they use marketplace to publish their data, and there are buyers who can look for that data. The other alternative for that company could also be that they could list their service, and buyers could actually request for which location they want to have that analysis. The key point is that the company that has the data, that's the analytic company, does not need to upload that data in any other platform, but they can keep it on their own platform. All they are doing is they are exposing their data via secure mechanisms to the outside world or to their potential customers, who can buy that data, or it can be part of as a bought service from them, that they have access to that data from the source. So integrating that, as was also being explained in the previous session, you have the data, and that data could be existing, and perhaps you are using your own data models, your own language to define that data. Then on top of it, what you can do is you can implement a context broker at the front, which acts then as your proxy for outside world to access your data, using a common language, as explained by Jason and Juanjo, that you use NGSILD as a language to talk with each other, and you integrate the data model, or you use a smart data model to explain to the other party that, okay, this is the reference data model we are using. So you make it clear to the other party, okay, this attribute actually means these things, and based on that you can exchange the data. And then of course the key element is how do you allow access to the external party, and that's where the whole security layer, the trust framework of IFA-Trust comes in, that with the proper identities based on EIDAS, you can first identify and authenticate if the identity is really the party who it is claiming, and that means that you are very sure on who that party is with whom you are exchanging the data. And the second part is the authorization and the usage control mechanisms. So based on the agreements that you made, or based on the buying conditions of the buyer, you make sure that the buyer gets the consuming party gets the access to the right data, and what it can do with that data as well is what you can attach to it when providing that authorization. So for example, in the example that I just gave on the soil quality report, it can be very well licensed such that, example, that it is for farming, then it uses only for soil quality information for farming purposes, and determining the best fit crops to be grown in that kind of soil. But it perhaps cannot use it for any other purpose than non-farming, for example. That could be a license that it could attach to it, and the buyer has to oblige by it. I hope that answers the question.
There are some questions, if I may add, that should be made clear, and are connected to where things have to be hosted and so on. As I explained, I think it was in the session yesterday or one of the sessions, I don't remember. I4Trust is not going to provide a hosting environment for the experiments. So if company X is aiming to export some data as part of a given experiment, it is because it is expected that such company will set up some servers where I4Trust components will be deployed, and therefore that data be exposed in the data space that company X will create together with the other companies or organizations with whom it's sharing data, and of course they need to perhaps publish some of the data resources they export in the marketplace. For that, we will be offering this marketplace global service on an environment we will host, and they will need to subscribe or register their company in the iShare Satellites global service, and of course we will bring support to that process. But I just want to complement what Rajiv said with this aspect about, let's say, what is expected in terms of where data is hosted, where data is located, and so on. And in that sense, very important, company X will not need to, let's say, transfer data to any environment we manage. Actually, it is then who will host typically the data and share that with those companies it wishes so, and are also part of the experiment. They don't need to share it with others if they don't want to.
Shall I give a practical example? Rajiv mentioned one, maybe add one other, just to get the thinking going. One of the use cases that we see, well, at least here in the Netherlands, around the transportation data that is shared at the moment, is that transportation, well, basically orders, and it's called CMRs, are currently stored at a CMR vendor on behalf of a transporting company. But in cases when there's an accident happening, the fire brigade and well, the government can actually access that data and access the contents of that transportation, which they usually can't. But the fact that there's an accident happening with that specific truck gives them the rights to access that information, which is stored at a third party. But this same logic that Rajiv and Juanjo just mentioned, that's a practical version of that. Well, actually putting that data sharing to use. And I think there are more examples like that where there's a long value chain already, where you can create, well, surprising value by tapping in halfway of that value chain by getting access based on authorizations you retrieve.
Thank you, Rajiv, Juanjo, and Gerard. I think that's quite a good and complete answer to this question. We don't have any more questions, so please, guys, bring them in. And for now, I would like to invite Margarita to tell us a little bit about Spaces. taking advantage that you guys are still thinking of your questions. So please take it away, Margarita.
Thank you, Jane. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to meet you, and it's been really exciting to see everyone throughout the training. I am from Funding Box, so I'm working on this project and a couple of others within the organization. You've probably seen a couple of my posts, but I just wanted to highlight that this community is not only a space for information, but a space to actually build meaningful connections and synergies. So I'm going to take just a few seconds while everyone is thinking of their questions to share how you can actually make the most of this platform. So as you know, this is the I4Trust community, and we have this private working space where we are all posting the information. And I have recently, yesterday, posted a new announcement on how to introduce yourself, because one of the features that we have on the Funding Box platform is our collections. Collections are content that are posted throughout the community, organized by the type of the content. And we've created a specific collection once my internet allows me to show it to you. But we've created a specific collection known as the People of I4Trust. In this collection, it is separate from the Introduce Yourself section, but in this section you can create individual posts where you can add a little bit more information, your picture, some links, some images about your organization and your expertise. So there we go. So these are the collections, and we have this collection called the People of I4Trust. Now, what's nice about this collection is it actually presents the people that introduce themselves in this user-friendly way, where you can easily click a post and read more about the person. So I've decided to post Funding Box just so everyone knows the organization that I represent, but feel free to post anything that you prefer. A little bit about my background, and at Funding Box I currently support 2 other projects. I'm more than happy to share more about that. But of course, in addition to that, please feel free to message me for any questions about our communities and or the upcoming open call, which we will announce next week, I believe. Or sorry, in 2 weeks. So to do this, just go to the Introduce Yourself space, click this plus, and put a new People of I4Trust here. Select the option for new People of I4Trust. And you have this pre-made template where you can add your name, your title, your profile picture. Again, the hero image is that big background image, and you can use it to represent anything that you would like to share with the group, and a little bit of a write-up where you can add images and links to anything that may be of interest to your colleagues. Again, as a last note, we've provided this platform, but the extent to how helpful, exciting, or informative it can be is a shared opportunity for everyone. So we encourage everyone to create this post. If you have nothing to do if you have a few minutes this Friday afternoon, I think it would be a great way to meet your colleagues who have quite diverse expertise and who are around the world, so we can make the most of this digital space to connect. So that's it for me. If you have any questions about the platform or anything else I can help with, please let me know.
Thank you, Margarita. I'll actually start a yes or no vote to ask all of the attendees if they've already joined the Spaces community and they've checked it out, because apart from the networking opportunities, we're also sharing the training materials there, and it's also a great space where you can connect to the speakers and ask them questions directly. And so far, actually, I have 100% of yes in the answers. So that is actually great.
I'm hoping the 100% of respondees create all these new introduce yourself posts. So I'm looking forward to reading those. And throughout the project, throughout the open call and after, as we continue with the project, we'll continue to use this community. If anyone has any interesting articles, anything from your own organizations that you think would be interesting to the group, we encourage really everyone to share.
Thank you, Margarita. I'll put in the chat another question that I think it might be relevant for everybody that we got earlier this week, which is, would it be feasible to just use the context broker to share data between organizations or divisions of the same organization without the use of the marketplace? Which is slightly more towards the technical, but still important. I don't know if the speakers that are here with me who wants to take it, Juanjo?
Yes, the short answer is yes, it's feasible. There might be some use cases where you may not need to go to the marketplace and be exposing data resources that participants offer in the marketplace, because the particular use case you are considering is a use case where, let's say, by design or by definition of the use case, participants have to know each other very well from the beginning, right? And so that is indeed feasible. Given said that, and what we have explained, and that is something you will be able to read in the DIH onboarding kit we share with you, is that we are looking for experiments that, and there might be competition among different experiments willing to get selected through the open call, and every matter counts in terms of, let's say, winning points in the final score a particular proposal will receive. And we have said very explicitly that we will, any experiment where you might consider in a meaningful manner, because we do not want things to be artificial, but if you bring a experiment where it is meaningful, that part of the data being shared is published on the marketplace, essentially because the parties may not need to be, they don't need to know each other in a priori, or because a given participant may be exposing data that even might be valuable beyond the experiment and so on. Those experiments will get a higher score in the excellent part of the proposal when the application is rated. Does it mean that it will? A proposal that use the marketplaces will always win against a proposal that is not using the marketplace? No, it doesn't mean that, because there are other elements that will be equally assessed, like what is going to be the impact of that use case, how relevant evaluators will see that in terms of potential business opportunity, potential reusability of the use case, and so on. So at the end, proposals will be evaluated taking all aspects in consideration, and marketplace is something that gives you additional points, but is nothing that is requirement. So you will see in the guideline for applicants that is not part of the eligibility criteria, to be very clear, and so therefore they are not strictly needed. Using the context broker for sharing data using NGS-ILD, that is an eligibility criteria, for instance. That is I mean, you cannot come with an experiment that is not using NGSILD for exchanging data, or is not using, let's say, the identity and access management framework we have defined in I4 Trust. Those are the requirements. Using the marketplace is, let's say, it's something we offer, is something that we believe is interesting for some use cases, and something that a given application will get some bonus points thanks to that.
I see. Thanks, Juanjo. I'll move this one to answered. And then another one that we have is there a way to customize the I4 Trust Marketplace interface for a more immersive experience?
Well, if you allow me to take that one again, well, we would need to define what we mean by immersive experience, of course, but the marketplace actually allows to configure certain aspects about the themes and the user experience. So you may play with that. Also, the marketplace components in Fireware and the BAE component. I mean, there is a separation between, let's say, the more sort of backend components and the portal itself. So someone would be able to set up still a marketplace relying on just the backend components. Given said that, I believe it's not, and I explained that already in one of the sessions. We do not expect you or require from you that you deploy and set up and configure your own marketplace, unless you believe and you can justify that for your particular use case, it makes a lot of sense that you have your own marketplace. We suggest that you leverage on the global marketplace service we will offer, because that will be easier for everyone to give you support, and for what refers to the experiment, it should allow you to do, we believe, what you may need.
Thank you, Juanjo. I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything to this question.
One thing to add to my previous response is, of course, we are talking about experiments that once they get selected through the open call, they will go for an implementation phase of 9 months. And this is an experimental environment. And there is where they can leverage on the marketplace global service we offer. They can leverage on the iShare satellite services we offer, and so on, which will simplify then the implementation of the experiment. But then later on, when they go to the market, and which is something we of course expect and advise, they are not forced, or they are not necessarily expected to use those global services. They will have to a bit decide, okay, am I going to partner with others to create an actual marketplace and do business around that? How to work on that respect? I'm going to share the iShare data spaces that already exist, and let's say in the market, and leverage on that, or I will try to create something similar under the same basis. That will be a bit decisions in the go-to-market that the experiments will have to make during the process, and of course we will give advice to them and support on that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Juanjo. And we have two more questions, which is it true or will it also be available after this training program concludes? Wait, sorry, the other way around. My initial impression was that the funding box of iForTrust Space is a platform for attendees and speakers to interact and share resources during and only during the trainers program. Is this true, or will it also be available after this training program concludes? To add to that, will the same space be used for future programs?
I guess this is a question for me, but these were a couple of questions. So not at all. The platform is to be used throughout the project. Right now, we're using it primarily to engage on the train the trainers, but I think some of you have seen the post regarding the ambassadors program. We're also going to be posting about the open call, and as mentioned, it's not only a space to share information, but also to engage with each other. So any questions as you prepare for the open call, as you prepare your experiments, or even after the training, continue to have technical or general business questions, we encourage you to use this space instead of sending sporadic emails to different speakers. Here, everyone can make the most of seeing shared questions and shared information. So the answer to the short answer is this will be used after the trainers program. And to add to that, yes, the same space. Well, this space will be used for the iForTrust initiative throughout the iForTrust initiative project. So I hope I was able to answer your question.
If you allow me to add a couple of things, and again, I want to refer to the DIH onboarding kit that we sent to you. You will find that within the iForTrust community platform, there will be several spaces. So far, we have been using the DIH working group space, which is a private space that allows interaction between you and us. But there are other spaces you see in the community platform, and those can be used for you because there might be something that you may wish to allow that others see. Let me put this an example. You may come with a technical question, and that question is something that you believe might be useful when SMEs later on may join the community, right? So those kind of questions, we encourage you to use the iForTrust. I think the name was iForTrust Help Desk space, and then which is a public space for those not only VIH but SMEs that may join the community at certain point, and therefore questions that might come there coming from you, but you believe might be useful for even SMEs or other VIHs that have not joined yet or whatever. Feel free to post them in that space.
Yeah, and I'll just add a couple of more things. Thank you, Margaret and Juanjo. Yeah, and as Juanjo mentioned, please do refer to the onboarding kit where we have detailed out this, but also look forward to the further training sessions, specifically on the 10th of May, where we explain how iForTrust ecosystem building activities would take place and how we plan to sustain this iForTrust beyond this initiative as well. And from our perspective, the funding box platform for iForTrust is the platform where is our regular platform where we will interact with each other, but also any other participants in future who wants to participate in iForTrust would be that platform would serve as an entry point for them. And of course, there will be also multi-tier support training the last week of this training session, where we'll also explain a little bit how these workspaces would enable those kind of processes within iForTrust for all the participants to benefit.
Thank you, everybody, for the answer to that question. I would like to add, both for posting in the spaces, but also for asking in a session like this, if you have a question and you're not sure, like, oh, is this really relevant or not, I would encourage you to just ask it, because it's likely that somebody else has the same question. So please don't be shy about asking stuff. And I also see that Margarita has just shared in the chat the IH onboarding kit, the link to it, so that you can check it out in case you haven't checked it out yet. And for now, we don't have questions coming up, so please, if there's anything you want to say, ask the question or raise your hand and we'll give you the microphone. And they aren't coming in, guys. We have one more, which was asked earlier. Let me post it in the chat for everybody to be able to see it. And it's going to be several parts. Then the speakers can already start reading it to see who wants to answer it. And this one, I think, comes up from yesterday's session.
So I will. Okay, I see. But what I have read so far, and let me make it clear. And we have to be careful with the wording and try to be as precise as possible when we talk about data sharing and the particular, let's say, functionality connected to how I offer data. What you monetize in iFortrust or are able to publish offering about are services for accessing data. So it's not, I mean, it's the access to the data what you offer and might sell. It's not like you buy the data and so you buy the access to the data, and then of course once you get access to the data you can use it under certain perhaps legal conditions that might have been established, which are part of this offering. So the combination of both, let's say, the technical framework that we have plus the legal framework is what may help a given participant to establish the terms and conditions for accessing and using the data, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's always how do you monetize the data? That is what I read as the question. And in my view, if I make it very simple, then there are of course two ways. One is you sell the data as part of a service that you are providing, or if you have already, like I was giving the example of analytics. So there is a report data that you want that's a derived data, or you have big data and you analyze it and make it available as a report. Or it could be open data, or it could be the logistics data of or the transport data, how busy it is right now on certain streets or certain highways, for example. And Whether you want to sell it or not, that's of course company's decision. But the way what we enable is that seamless access to that information. So there are two ways in the simplest form is one as part of a service, or you have a set of data which you want to just sell and monetize on it, and you just list that as a resource itself. That's one key one way to look at it. But normally what we will also often see is that you need to also share some data of the service. So in the example that we used in the reference, that is package delivery. The package delivery company, of course, always has the track and trace information of the packages and everything, but oftentimes it cannot usually provide that information to its customers. Unless the customer also integrates and it has bilateral contract created out of every time that okay, this is how they can access that information. And to streamline that process itself, if they implement the components provided by Fortrust, that makes it much more streamlined for package delivery company, but also for the customers of it, that they have a simple way to know, okay, this is how you get access to the data. And the package delivery company always knows the right identities and the right conditions under which the data is being used. So it remains in a way in that control.
There are two things I would like to add, which also might be important. In an I4Trust data space, you would not be simply, let's say, exchanging and potentially monetizing access to data. Is also there might be an inherent processing of that data. So, for instance, in the example of the packet service delivery, we are precisely managing access to the ability to modify the date and expected place of the delivery of a given packet. That is not simply selling data. You are actually selling a service around that data and the ability to change those kind of data attributes. And that's the reason why we believe I4Trust is really much powerful than some other perhaps data space visions that you may see described out there, because it will allow participants to be able to offer not just data access service, but also data processing services in a way. And that's a very important part of the data economy we want to support. And the second very important aspect I want to mention is it's true that in the example, because we wanted to make it as complete as possible, the scenario had this question about offering and payments of and things like that. But there might be use cases where you participants will be exposing data or some data service, and there are terms and conditions to apply and to enforce, but not necessarily a pricing around. So I just want to make it clear that the aspect about monetizing do not need to be there in all the use cases. But still, what we believe is going to be very common to all cases is the ability to define access policies to such data services and mechanisms for enforcing those.
Very clear. Thank you, Juanjo. Any more questions? We got one earlier in the week, which was if we could provide a list or comment on the countries which are represented by the DIHs in the trainers program. And at this time, we can't explicitly say which DIHs are here and all of that. But I think we could encourage you to just share it in the chat from which countries you're joining us. I think that could be interesting. Also, if you hover on top of the names of the attendees, you can see their name, from which DIH they are, and in many occasions from which city they are. In my case, as you know, I'm from Eicher, and I'm joining from Rotterdam in the Netherlands. I don't know if any other of the speakers also want to share where they're joining from.
Hi, I'm joining from Madrid, although our funding box team is around Poland, Denmark, and Spain.
Yeah, well, just to follow that good example, I'm with iShare, I would say, of course, and also based in Rotterdam, the Netherlands.
Rajiv, do you want to share where you're joining from?
Yes, of course. I'm joining from Amsterdam, the Netherlands.
Nice, thank you.
I see there is a question.
Yes, we have a question, which is, how can we review this week's training sessions?
What do we mean by review?
Exactly, I was wondering the same.
Okay, because watching then is through YouTube. I see that someone has already provided the link. So
Yes, so if you want to see the slides and also recordings of these sessions, the YouTube link is already provided. And if you go to the DIH working group space, for every day session, there is a post where you can find a brief summary of what the session was about and the links to where you can find the recording and the slides of those sessions. So you can always go back and look at those sessions.
I'll pull the link of the slides as well. That's yesterday's, but from there you can also go to the other questions. Yeah, you're welcome. Are there any more questions? Please do make them, because if not, we might just close the session earlier. So you might just lose your chance.
Or of course, use the portal to reach out to any one of us.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you can always ask questions, but at least now live. I don't know if any of the speakers wants to add anything.
Well, I'm just curious on well, people that are currently attending, if they can share some examples of use cases they think about. And I think it's also worthwhile to open up the discussion, and maybe we need to do a bit more training on that, is how to actually set up a new data space, and what the structure is to get that going. Well, depending on what the level of knowledge is, but I can imagine that is a question they want to spend more time on. We covered a lot in the training sessions, of course, so it's not But I can imagine in terms of organization and how to start, how to make the first steps. And we've seen in other countries and in other data spaces, it can be tough. So open to a discussion and to support in that. If you could share areas, market segments you're thinking about, then we might already have links to existing data. Yeah, cool. And it sounds like a plan.
Yes, if you can raise your hand, I'll invite you on to stage so that you can tell us about it.
So I guess Annette, who wanted to share their case, you have to raise the hand, no? And then you can bring her on stage.
Annette is a speaker now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Now we have her. Yeah. Welcome.
Can you hear me?
Hey, Annette.
Yes.
Okay. Hi. Oh, no, thanks for this. It's I'm not really prepared, but I thought it's nice to discuss a real case for all of us. At least we are struggling with it, how to do it. So I hope to learn from everybody and everybody from what we are going through. What we are currently making is last mile delivery at home service of unattended deliveries at home. So you can, we are already doing a pilot in the Netherlands. So you can deliver you have your groceries delivered, or your packages, your parcels, from Zalando or whatever, delivered in a box without having to be at home. And it's also climatized. That's why my question was the type of box and the fact that. That is important, because you have to retain the cold chain. But what we would like to do is not so much maybe the access to the box, because we think that's much deeper in it, but we would like to standardize in a very secure manner the exchange of data between the shippers and us, and between the logistic providers and us, and vice versa, so that we can do that in a really smart way. So that's basically our use case. Is that clear? I mean, are there any questions?
Yeah, well, I think it's a kind of use case that makes a lot of sense within I4Trust. You have, as far as I understood, like 3 participants, like logistics companies, then the shipper, and then the potential customers that receive those products, and you have to come with a model that describes what are the interactions between those participants, because at the end of the day, it's about data sharing. You need to come up with firstly identification of what is the data you believe those participants wish to share, because by sharing that, they improve whatever process, and that should be modeled in a way as based on data models and entities that each of the participants may be able to export and or consume attributes about, describing them. And then each of these participants should have a sort of a context broker component, and different identity and access management elements connected to them. And you have to come with a design of what will be the access policies you want to define, enabling each participant and only the right participants to access its data, and yeah, that way somehow make it work. But I see it's an example very suitable for I4 Trust. Is, I have to say, very similar to use case we are dealing with in another project we are involved. There is a project we are involved where there is a particular use case where shippers and delivery companies and cities have to share data, because it's about the city allowing the package delivery companies only to access certain parts of the city and based on restrictions the city wishes to apply. It's not exactly the same one you have described, but it has some similarities in the sense of having this kind of participants involved, and they could model that using entities with their attributes and so on, and defining where to enforce access management and so on. So I think it's pretty suitable. I don't know if Gerard, Rajib, who are experts in the logistics sector, may add a lot on that, because your use case is very much connected to logistics, so they may want to add.
I think there, in terms of data standard, you have a few areas of data that is going to be shared, and I don't know whether there's say a fill level sensor data part in the smart data model side at the moment, Juanjo. But of course, if you want to transport to a home where there's a delivery box, you want to know what the availability or the space is in that box prior to driving out to that location. Because if it's already full, it's pointless to start delivering on it. And I think that part of the data that is specifically interesting to connect from the users, and then also from the supermarkets and all the suppliers that you work for. They share what kind of volumes they have for that specific client, and hence combine that. It's interesting to so there's transportation data where you need a data model. You have sensor data on the level of goods that's in the storage facility, and the order data, which you want to get also in an relatively anonymous way, because you don't want to get into competition or have the danger of sharing the goods and the full details of orders.
But you won't have the full details of order.
No.
Oh, but I think when customer uses the online portal to place the order, or whichever channel it uses to place the order, the shop or the e-commerce website has to know that it has to be delivered in the box that customer owns, right? That is the first, if I understand this correctly. And from there, the logistics provider needs to check, okay, when would be, as Gerard was mentioning, when would be the most suitable time for to transport that, depending on one, if there is space available in the box. Two, as Joanjo was mentioning, if it is part of the smart city model, and the municipality wants to control the last mile deliverers. In the sense that it wants to make sure that there is efficient flow of traffic, and it does not collide or coincide with regular peak hours of public transport, for example, so that it can better manage the road resources. Then those parameters, you need to add that, and I think it is a perfect example or perfect use case for IFA-Trust, because Context Broker can help you in getting this information together, and based on those things, you can use to make the decision when is the best time to do the transport.
Thank you.
Welcome.
We'll probably be in touch a bit more on this, Annette.
Okay.
I think there are a few existing data nodes under iShare that are already available that you could utilize.
Yeah.
And thanks for sharing your use case, Annette.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I leave the stage. Bye.
Thank you, Annette. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Is there someone else who would like to share their use case?
Well, apparently not. So if we
I
don't
guess
have any,
also some questions and answers may come for the next session next Friday, because somehow this week is probably a lot of information has been received, and attendees need to digest, and they will probably also during these days be and beginning of next week starting to really play with the technology and do first practice with it, and I'm sure more questions will come by then. So yeah, I find that probably it's normal that in this first Q&A session not all the questions will come. and we will have more next one.
exactly.
Absolutely. And I mean, for next week, it's mostly time to have the practical exercises. On Tuesday, we have a session with Jason on the advanced operations of NGSL. And we also have the Q&A on Friday, as Juanjo is saying, which will be the same dynamic than today, with the two parts for technical and business questions. Yeah, and throughout the week, as Marguerite explained, please feel free to connect with us via the spaces. Since we won't have the active sessions on AirMeet, but we will be there following up with you guys. I don't know if anybody else wants to say anything else, or if we should perhaps invite everybody to go to the lounge.
I have a quick note that if anyone wants to invite anyone else into the DIH working group space, that it is a private group space right now, and we need the usernames. So if any of their colleagues want to be invited to that space, to send us a message on the help desk or somewhere. But the whole community is a public community, so that can also be shared with anyone in their network to join the IFA-Trust the conversation at IFA-Trust.
Thank you, Margarita. I take nobody else wants to add anything? No.
Nope, nothing from me.
Yeah. Then I guess we should move to the launch. Perhaps an opportunity for others to network with us or have a conversation with us.
Exactly. Lunchtime. Lunchtime.
Launch time.
Yeah, perfect.
Pun
Thank you very
intended.
much. Oh,
Thank you.
sorry, Karak.
No pun intended. You're.
Oh,
Thank you.
sorry, Karak.
No pun intended. You're.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.